Walton's voice ASMR. Hi. Hi. If I've not seen you before, welcome. Welcome to the channel. And if I have, it's wonderful to have you back. Tonight I am going to be reading to you a bedtime story. To help you relax and sleep. This is the book that I shall be reading tonight. It is called Eric by Terry Pratchett. You will probably find some of the story. You may be able to hear some maybe fairly unintelligible whispered sounds to help you to sleep. Okay, so I'm going to begin by turning on the story to the opening pages. Oh, don't you love the sound books make? Love the sound books make. The bees of death are big and black. They buzz slow and sombre. They keep their honey in combs of wax as white as altar candles. Their honey is as black as night, thick as sin. It is well known that 8 colours make up white. 8 colours make up white. But there are also 8 colours of blackness for those that is the seeing of them, and the highs of death among the black grass in the black orchard under the black blossomed ancient boughs of trees that will eventually produce apples that, put like this, probably won't be black. The grass was short now. The scythe that had done the work leaned against the gnarled bole of a pear tree. Now Death was inspecting his bees, gently lifting the combs in his skeletal fingers. A few bees buzzed around him. Like all beekeepers, Death wore a veil, but sometimes a bee would get inside his skull and buzz around and give him a headache. Are you sitting back? Are you sitting back? Are you relaxed? Are you comfortable? Then I will resume. As he held a comb up to the late grey light of his little world between realities, there was the faintest of tremors. A hum went up from the hive, a leaf floated down. A wisp of wind blew for a moment through the orchard, and that was the most uncanny thing, because the air in the land of death was always warm and still. Death fancied that he heard very briefly the sound of running feet and a voice saying, "No," a voice thinking, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die." Death is almost the oldest creature in the universe, with habits and modes of thought that mortal men cannot begin to understand. But because he was also a good beekeeper, he carefully replaced the comb in its rack and put the lid back on the hive. Before reacting, he strode back through the garden. At his cottage, he removed the veil, carefully dislodging a few bees that had got lost in the depths of his cranium, and he retired to his study. As he sat down at his desk, there was another rush of wind which rattled the hourglasses on the shelves and made the big pendulum clock in the hall pause ever so briefly. in its interminable task of slicing time into a manageable bits. Death sighed, and he focused his gaze. There is nowhere that death will not go, no matter how distant and dangerous. In fact, the more dangerous it is, the more likely he is to be there already. Now he stared through the mists of time and space. "Oh," he said, "it's him." Are you still comfortable? Are you still sitting back? Sitting back. Are you comfortable? Are you feeling sleepy? Are you feeling sleepy? Yes. I hope you are feeling sleepy. That's it. Sit back. Relax. 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 It's okay. It's okay. You can rest now. I'll carry on reading this book for you. Okay. It was a hot afternoon in late summer in Ankh-Morpork, normally the most thriving, bustling, and above all the most crowded city on the disk. Now the spears of the sun had achieved what innumerable invaders, several civil wars, and the curfew law had never achieved. It had pacified the place. Dogs lay panting in the scalding shade. The river Ankh, which was never what you might call sparkled, oozed between its banks. The heat had sucked all the spirit out of it. The streets were empty, oven brick hot. No enemies had ever taken Ankh-Morpork. Well, technically they had. Quite often, the city welcomed free-spending barbarian invaders, but somehow the puzzled raiders always found after a few days that they didn't own their own houses anymore, and within a couple of months they were just another minority group with its own graffiti and food shops. But the heat had besieged the city and triumphed over the walls. It lay the trembling streets like a shroud under the blow lamp of the sun. Assassins were too tired to kill. It turned thieves honest. In the ivy-covered fastness of Unseen University, Premier College of Wizardry, the inmates dozed with their pointy hats over their faces. Even blue bottles were too exhausted to bang against window panes. The city siested, awaiting the sunset and the brief, hot velvet surcease of the night. Only the librarian was cool. He was also swinging and hanging out. This was because he had rigged up a few ropes and rings in one of these sub-basements of the Unseen University Library, the one where they kept the erotic books. Just erotic, nothing kinky. It's the difference between using a feather and a chicken. And he was dreamily dangling in the chilly vapour above them. All the books of magic were there. They had a life of their own. Are you still comfortable? Are you still comfortable? Yes. Yes. Okay. One more minute. I'll just finish this passage. In the case of the volumes on tantric sex magic for the serious connoisseur, kept under very cold water to stop them bursting into flames and scorching their severely plain covers, the librarian swung gently back and forth above the seething vats, dozing peacefully. Then the footsteps came out of nowhere, raced across the floor with a noise that scraped the raw surface of the soul, and disappeared through the wall. There was a faint, distant scream that sounded like, oh God, I'm going to die. The librarian woke up, lost his grip, and flopped into the few inches of tepid water that was all that stood between the joy of tantric sex with illustrations for the advanced student by a lady and spontaneous combustion. It would have gone badly for him if the librarian had been a human being. Fortunately, he was currently an orangutan. So much raw magic sloshing around in the university library, it would be surprising if accidents did not happen sometimes, and one particularly impressive one had turned him into an ape. people get the chance to leave the human race while still alive, and he'd strenuously resisted all efforts since to turn him back, since he was the only librarian in the universe who could pick up books with his feet. The university hadn't pressed the point. It also meant that his idea of desirable female companionship now looked something like a sack of butter thrown through a wall of folding the tubes, and so he was lucky to get away with only mild burns, a headache, and some rather ambivalent feelings about cucumbers, which wore off by tea time. In the library above, the ground was creaked and rustled the pages in astonishment as the invisible runner passed straight through the bookshelves and disappeared, or rather, disappeared even more. Are you still comfortable? Shall we continue? I could carry on for a few more minutes if you want. Yes? Okay. Maybe 2 or 3 more minutes. Okay. And Morpork gradually awoke from its slumber. Are you sure you're comfortable? Yes. Are you feeling sleepy? Are you feeling sleepy? Okay. Don't resist it. Just close your eyes. Close your eyes. If you're feeling sleepy, let sleep take you. It's fine. It's fine. Something invisible and yelling at the top of its voice was passing through every part of the city, dragging in its wake a trail of destruction wherever it went. Things changed. A fortune teller in the street of cunning artificers heard the footsteps, ran across her bedroom floor, and found her crystal ball had turned into a little glass sphere with a cottage in it, plus snowflakes. In a quiet corner of the mended drum tavern where the adventurous Serena, the henna-haired Harridan, Red Sheridan and Gnome, Witch of the Night, were meeting for some gold talk and a game of canasta. All the drinks turned into small yellow elephants. It's them wizards up at the university, said the barman, hastily replacing the glasses. It oughtn't to be allowed. Midnight dropped off the clock. The Council of Wizardry rubbed their eyes and stared blearily at one another. They felt it oughtn't be allowed too, especially since they weren't the ones that were allowing it. Finally, the new Arch-Chancellor Ezra Sebastian sat up straight in his chair and tried to look suitably magisterial. He knew he really wanted the job. He was 98 and had achieved this worthwhile age by carefully not being any trouble or any threat to anyone. He had hoped to spend his twilight years completing his 7-volume treatise on some little-known aspects of Hungarian rain-making rituals, which were an ideal subject for academic study in his opinion, since the rituals only ever worked in Ku, and that particular continent had slipped into the ocean several thousand years ago. It took 30 years to subside. The inhabitants spent a lot of the time wading. It went down in the history of the multiverse as the most embarrassing continental catastrophe. The trouble was that in recent years the lifespan of Archchancellors seemed to be a bit on the short side, and the natural ambition of all wizards for the job had given way to a curious, self-effacing politeness. He had come down one morning to find everyone calling him sir. It had taken him days to find out why. His head ached, but it was several weeks past his bedtime. But he had something to say. Gentlemen, he began. Ook, sorry, and ook, I mean apes, of course. Ook. The Arch-Chancellor opened and shut his mouth in silence for a while, trying to reroute his train of thought. The librarian was, ex officio, a member of the college council. No one had ever been able to find any rule about orangutans being bald, although they had surreptitiously looked very hard for one. I think maybe we can leave the story here, as you appear to be drifting off. Good night, and thank you for listening.